Greetings, fellow nerds. Today we're going to discuss, some geography. Let's start with geography. For the word geography, begins with the Greek prefix geo, meaning earth. Much like polytheistic, begins with the Greek prefix poly, meaning many. In other words, there's so many words in the English language that have Greek roots because so much of Western history, that is European history, American history, and language and culture, political culture especially, stems from Greek history. So let's just take a little walk down memory lane. Let's see where we started. So you can see we began over here in the east with China, and we're going to venture down the Silk Road to India, and finally, for tonight's lecture, to Greece. So that's today. Our objective is that you will be able to describe the major political developments of the classical Mediterranean. When we say classical Mediterranean, we mean Greece and Rome specifically. So just a reminder about political developments. What do we mean? Well, political development is a characteristic of government in a given civilization. It helps describe what that government was like. We could be talking about rulers, pharaohs, emperors, kings, queens, etc. We could be describing the system of government in use, like a dynasty or an empire. We could describe philosophy, important ideas behind a government, such as Confucianism in China, or as you'll see, kind of the philosophy behind classical Greek democracy. At this point, I just want to point out that there are no outline notes, right? There are no guided notes for you to complete for this lecture. Rather, we'd like you to create Cornell notes, so all these subtopics, subheadings, sub-information. Sub, by the way, another Greek root. All this should be on the left side of your notes with the supporting details on the right. So, let's talk some more geography. Where is Greece? Well, you'll notice that it is just a little bit north of Egypt across the Mediterranean Sea, and in reference to the Roman Empire, which we'll get to soon enough, it is just a little east of that. The Mediterranean Sea is significant to early ancient civilizations. As you'll see, Egypt is really not that far from Greece, just across the Mediterranean Sea, and in fact they have lots of interactions. Think Cleopatra. Now, Greece is made up of many different city-states. The geography is extremely divided, so you'll notice that it's a mountainous region and heavy with islands. Lots of people nowadays like to take Greek cruises, heading around, go check out Crete in the south, or maybe what was Peloponnesus. Check out the Sea of Crete, Ionian Sea. The Aegean Sea is probably the most significant of those, the Adriatic. All these are connected to the Mediterranean. But what this says is the topography and the geography of Greece is heavily divided, and so are the politics. We have individual city-states in Greece. It is not a centralized form of government. It's divided somewhat like Mesopotamia. And so, as I mentioned, the geography is reflected in the politics of Greece, how it's organized. What we're focusing on especially are the two most significant city-states, Sparta, where the arrow is now, and Athens. These are the top dogs of the Greek city-states. So let's just talk about when this is happening. Quick reminder on timing. Well, classical Greece, when we say classical Greece, we're talking about the civilization on the peninsula where Athens is, from about 800 BCE to 600 BCE. So kind of as Egypt is weakening after thousands of years of great power, some of that power, some of the culture of Egypt transfers over to Greece. In fact, it's a Greek historian, Herodotus, who even defines what Egypt is. Herodotus ends up traveling around the Mediterranean and taking down the stories of other civilizations, and he becomes the world's first historian. And so much of how we understand the ancient world is through his lens. But he's a Greek guy talking about the pyramids of Egypt 2,000 years after the pyramids were even built. I digress just a little bit, so let's bring it back. Athens. Athens is significant, as I mentioned, and its height, the great achievements of Athens in terms of philosophy and art and culture, they occur in a pretty short span, about 51 years, from 500 BCE to 449 BCE. And Sparta is reaching its own height around the same time. So, let's use some Greek words. Why don't we? Polis. This is the first significant one. Polis is the structure of government. Polis actually means city-state. In fact, if you think about it, it remains a root in English. Metropolitan in English refers to a city and the surrounding area. So polis still has this reference to city, but this is how the Greeks organized in an individual polis. As I said a few times now, Athens and Sparta are the most significant of the polis. Athens is the cultural center. We have all these cultural achievements, arts, architecture, philosophy. Sparta, on the other hand, is militaristic, and as I'd imagine a few of you know through movies like 300, it's a warrior class of people, but it's also agricultural. They still need to feed themselves and each other, and so farming is still key. Now, these different polis have different types of government. There's some relationship, but they're loosely connected in kind of a confederacy of sorts. They're linked by treaties sometimes, and they interact via war other times. This will come up, as you'll see soon, in the Peloponnesian War. So, Athens. Let's start there. This is, of course, a picture of Athens. And Athens is generally attributed to for creating democracy. The whole concept of democracy is based in Athens. Does it predate Athens? Perhaps. But the word democracy, at the very least, is a Greek word. Demos means the people in Greek, and ocracy refers to rule by. So democracy is quite literally rule by the people. And as you see, these votes were public among citizens. We'll talk about who counted as a citizen soon enough. But just know for now that it's the citizens of Greece who have a say in their own government, which is not true in so many other forms of government. We can easily assume, oh, well, democracy, that's what government is. Well, that is true in modern day America and throughout much of the world, but it was not true throughout most of world history. Democracy is rare, and part of the reason it's rare is that it takes time. It's inefficient. It takes a long time to debate and discuss and decide. And so lots of people, lots of governments throughout history avoided it. It's sometimes called, I went to a program once when I was, going to be a senior in high school. I went to a program at Georgetown, and I had a professor who said, deliberative democracy, the style of democracy we have in America, and even the style of democracy they had in Athens, it takes time by design. If it seems like things don't really happen in Washington, D.C., things don't really happen in Athens, it takes forever for a law to be passed, for it to affect the people. That's by design, because we have lots of disagreements among the people, and the idea isn't to do it quickly. If we wanted to do it quickly and efficiently, then we would just have a dictatorship. That's much more efficient. But in order to have a democracy, you need to be willing to have debates and discussion, and to say the process matters as much, if not more, than the result. So that's the Athenian democracy. It is supported by some of the early philosophical political thought. So Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, they are considering big questions. What should government look like? They want to pursue the good, and they want government to reflect the good of society. And they decide to use reason, to use logic, to explain the world around them and decide what society should be like and look like. And this is something to consider. If you had to design your own government, not just what would the government look like, but what type of questions would you ask to decide what is fair? Who benefits from your government? Who suffers in your government, and why? These are questions that thousands of years ago, ancient Athenians, classical Athenians also wondered, queried, and came to conclusions about. What you see here is a famous painting called The School of Athens by Raphael, a Renaissance artist over nearly 2,000 years later. Raphael and many Renaissance artists look backwards 2,000 years to ancient Greece and Rome to some extent, but here's Greece, because they valued learning in their art, and they felt like Greece is the foundation of learning, of education, of philosophy, of understanding. So these later Europeans, 2,000 years later, really valued the Greek thinkers. Now, what's interesting about this painting is each of these individuals, nearly all of them, are intended to be specific thinkers of ancient Greece. So I'll give just a few examples. Take a look at the middle, number 14. That is Plato right there. He's actually, it's interesting, Raphael decided to paint his contemporary, another Renaissance artist, Leonardo da Vinci, as Plato. Next to Plato is Aristotle. He's number 15. 12 is Socrates, and we could keep going on. Diogenes is 16. Alexander the Great perhaps comes up as number 7. Epicurus is number 2. If these names sound familiar, then that's because they are still significant in society. If you've never heard of, say, Epicurus, you should take a look. Google Epicurus, and if you ever want to talk during office hours about any of these philosophers, thinkers, Euclid, by the way, is number 18, I should point out. He's significant in math. Feel free to go up to Miss Fivefold or Miss Hellman and ask them about Euclid. Significant figure. Pythagoras. You've heard of the Pythagorean theorem? Pythagoras is number 6 in the front left. So much of what you study today is based on the thought of these old dudes 2,000 years ago. This is Sparta. I'm sorry, let me try that again. This is Sparta! Okay, I'll be honest, I actually haven't even seen all the movie, just a clip. But the point is, Sparta, as you can see by the rage of this man's face, I forget the name of the actor, I should have looked this up again. But this guy is a true warrior, as Spartans were true warriors. That is, assuming we're only talking about the citizens of Sparta, men, and not slaves. It is agrarian as well, so they farmed because you need agriculture to survive. But they have a major slave population. Why? Well, the male citizens of Sparta were soldiers. And so who did they get to make the crops for them to eat and subsist from? The slave population. So let's talk about major trends between Athens and Sparta. By the way, on the right, we have a map of the Peloponnesian War, a war between many of the different Greek states, led by Sparta on one side and Athens on the other. So exciting. These two states not only were significant, but they battled each other. More about that in just a moment. Let's talk about what they had in common. So they both had representative government. They had actual representative senators, for example, who were voting on behalf of the people, the demos, right, of this ocracy and democracy. They also interacted quite a bit. They traveled. Athens had really the superior navy to Sparta, even though Sparta had the superior army to Athens, and sometimes they would interact pleasantly and have treaties and trade, and other times they would interact violently in war. One thing we can't ignore is slavery. Slavery existed in both Sparta and Athens, though in Athens it was not quite as rough as it was in Sparta. Even the word Spartan, if you look it up, lowercase Spartan, the adjective, refers to kind of a simple life without all these other accoutrements and caring about like how soft your pillows are, but rather how hard your toughness is. So life in Sparta was rougher than Athens, and they eventually battled. The Peloponnesian War lasted about a quarter of a century. We have some gaps in between where there were truces and they fought back and forth. At one point, Athenians actually really just slaughtered the mess out of Spartans. But it is the Spartans in the end who won the Peloponnesian War. It's called the Peloponnesian War, of course, because Sparta is on the island of Peloponnesus. And this ends up being a disaster for both of them. When Sparta wins, Sparta is weakened, Athens is weakened. As I mentioned, they are fighting as the kind of captains of these two squads. Sparta is leading one side, Athens the other, and they are both weakened through this war. And this eventually leads to their conquest by the Persians. So by weakening each other, they signal the beginning of the end of classical Greece. Have a great night.